Today's episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast is brought to you by Poor Richard's Cafe and Star Local Media. Poor Richard's Cafe, Plano's oldest restaurant since 1973. They are open daily from 5:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., serving the three most important meals of the day: breakfast, lunch, and dessert. It is true Texas home-style cooking made with love and grit. That is Poor Richard's Cafe, located off of Avenue K in Plano. Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Brian Murphy and Taylor Ragland. Spring football is in the books, guys. So with the first chapter of the high school football offseason having been written, let's take a look at just how our teams are doing heading into the summer. So we're going to adopt this format for the next few podcasts. We're going to go district by district. We're going to just discuss two districts each episode, one 5A and one 6A. But just kind of offering up a cursory look at kind of where our respective football teams are at this juncture of the offseason. And we are going to start over in 5A. There's really no rhyme or reason to the format or order of this. This is just, we had the three of us in the office, so why not? Let's wax philosophical about District 7-5A Division 2. And just as a refresher, because the football districts in 5A are different from the districts for every other sport, that is the district that has the four smallest Frisco ISD schools, so Reedy, Frisco High, Lebanon Trail, and Memorial. It has Lake Dallas, Lovejoy, and then Denison, Princeton, and Braswell out in Denton. Those last three, Denison, Princeton, Braswell, we'll get to them at a later juncture and whatnot. We're going to focus on the ones that are at least most near and dear to our coverage area. So, 7-5A Division 2 last year, this was a district that was at least heading in kind of defined by three teams. Reedy, Lake Dallas, Lovejoy, and then you had a nice little Cinderella story over at Frisco High and what they were able to do. But nevertheless, the biggest offseason storyline in this district, I think, without a question, is that you had how many districts, period, last year had a better top three quarterbacks than Reedy's Josh Foskey, Lake Dallas's Ryan Depperschmidt, and Lovejoy's Carson Collins? Pretty tough to find. So, but nevertheless, those three quarterbacks have all graduated, so you have three programs that all made the playoffs last year that could have very different looks to them heading into next fall. But if if the early off-season gleanings are any indication, it appears that at least one of them might be a little bit better suited than the others. So Taylor, what have you been picking up on Lovejoy right now?
Well, I was out at their spring game last Friday, their final scrimmage. It was really kind of less structured than some of the ones I've been to. But in any case, their official spring game and last practice, and one guy had a white jersey on and a sea of black and red, and that was Ralph Rucker. And his name has been all over the Lovejoy athletic program in a multitude of sports. Wrestling, very prominent. Baseball, starts in the outfield. Huge part of that baseball team. Huge part of the football team last season. Not obviously under center with Carson Collins, but in the secondary and other places. So he hasn't committed, and I say he, I mean head coach Todd Ford. He won't commit to saying that this is going to be our guy. There's no competition, but he did say that if they were to play some magical game on May 29th when we're recording this, Ralph Rucker's the starter. He was the only guy in a white jersey out at the spring game, and based on what I've seen and what you've seen out at 7-on-7, where he already led them to a state qualification in 7-on-7. He's going to be the guy. Yeah. He's a pure athlete, a lot more mobile, I think, than Carson Collins was. To Collins' credit, came back from knee injury, tried to kind of integrate that into his game a little bit, but Rucker brings a whole new dimension, just being so athletic. Made some really good throws at the spring game, some really long throws, looked really good. And that's a guy that hadn't really practiced with the football team because the baseball team made a run to the third round. So, as Lake Dallas, who we'll get to, searches, as Reedy potentially searches for their replacements, it seems like Lovejoy, may not have to look far for theirs.
That was one of the big things, because like you mentioned, I was out looking at some 7-on-7, covering that out in Hearst over the weekend. And in 7-on-7, you have to apply the obvious caveats because it's not actual 11-on-11 football and whatnot. And even for a player like Rucker, I mean, it kind of hamstrings his, the totality totality of his skill set, because you're just a pocket passer. Ralph Rucker coming from the secondary last year, you imagine there's going to be an element of speed to his game.
Oh yeah.
But nevertheless, like when you can kind of tell which if you're a competent quarterback in 7-on-7, it generally means that you're going to hold your own, come the fall. And I mean, I went in that thinking they lost Carson Collins, they lost Jahi Rainey, they lost a score of receivers. I mean, just what's that offense even going to look like? And for them to already less than 24 hours after their spring game turn right around and not miss a beat in 7-on-7. I mean, not just Ralph Rucker, but his top wideout at the very least at the SQT, Reed Westervelt. Those two just tore up Mesquite Poteet in their semifinal game. So who knows what the potential is there? But yeah, Lovejoy's offense averaged almost 38 points per game in 7-on-7 plays. So some very strong stuff from Rucker and in the Lovejoy offense. So, Reedy, I mean, with Josh Foskey graduating, are they still searching for a quarterback? It sounds like, though, they might have a potential heir apparent.
Well, things are interesting because in January, with the news of John Kitna getting hired onto the staff of the Cowboys and Reedy being right down the street from the Star, well, John's son, Jalen Kitna, who's going to be a junior, he's in a fierce QB battle with A.J. Padgett over at Reedy. I don't know. I wasn't told by Coach Cole, who is in the lead, that they're both right.
You'd expect most of these coaches are going to keep it close to the vest, for sure.
For sure, they're not going to release that kind of stuff until maybe July or August. But you got to think, a kid 6'3" with the name of the last name of a former starting quarterback in the NFL, longtime quarterback, and Jalen Kitna. You got to think he could be the front runner there. So maybe the heir apparent to Josh Foskey, who set the bar very high for that program, 3 years as the starter. There's going to be a lot of new faces for Reedy next season. They're getting 2 baseball guys that they had with the program as freshmen. They're going to be juniors next year in Dalton Beck and Josh Hernandez. And Coach Cole is really high on these guys. He says they're 2 phenomenal athletes. Beck expected to start at cornerback. Josh Hernandez expected to be one of the guys at receiver. And then, of course, you got to replace that offensive line. You still have Nate Anderson there, with 5-star recruit, just committed to OU a few weeks ago. He is a monster. He's one of the best offensive linemen in the state. But you graduate Isaiah Floyd, probably the strongest kid in all of Frisco. He squatted over 800 pounds at the weightlifting meet earlier this year. They have to replace him. Jason Myers, a bunch of guys you have to replace. But, you still have Nate Anderson, and it still helps that you have the district MVP in Will Harbor. Will Harbor, I'm told, he's lost about 10 pounds, gone from 230 to 220 this offseason, so he's even quicker. Just he's a bulldozer. But now I'm hearing he's shredded now.
How many positions is he going to play this season?
He's going to play all of the positions.
As many as possible.
They'll invent positions.
He might be the quarterback. He'll just throw it to himself and run down and get it. But no, Will Harbor, he's the kicker, starting linebacker, and goal line wildcat quarterback for Reedy, district MVP. So expect a monster year from him, and he's kind of been getting offers lately, finally getting noticed.
That's good.
During the season, he wasn't really getting the looks that he maybe should have been getting or felt like he deserved, and that was kind of weighing on him a little bit. But now, he's starting to get noticed. He's starting to get that much deserved recognition, and it's kind of relieving the stress on his shoulders a little bit. So I'd expect, obviously great things from Will Harbor next year.
A cursory Google search of Jalen Kitna shows that he has offers currently from Boston College, Colorado, and Tennessee. So 3.
You'd like to say he'll be the starter next year.
Certainly some promises, I believe. Now, where did he go last year? Was it some school in Arizona or whatnot? But nevertheless, so either way, I mean, the bar is still very high for Reedy. Just when you consider what they did last year, now are they able to? Is this what Reedy's going to be now going forward?
I think they'll be able to maintain. Maybe not on the same level as, hey, we almost beat Aledo in the fourth round.
This was a team that went 4 rounds deep and was ranked top 10 in the state.
And lost by 10 to Aledo.
Really out of nowhere, it seemed like. So
essentially, but when they had the biggest, baddest offensive line that I had seen, but they also need to replace their defensive line. Guys like Clay Patterson, Matthew Hoots, guys that won superlatives, were first-team all-district guys. They have to replace that entire unit, but he's really high on their safeties, led by Ryan Jones and Darius Blackman. That secondary is going to be big. Michael Swope, the younger brother of the Swopes, one that went to Frisco, the other one that went to Reedy. They played against each other in the same game a couple years ago. Now the youngest brother of those, Michael, he's coming in. Looks to be the starter at the will linebacker position. So that defense, Coach Cole is really high on. Last year it was that offensive running game, the offensive line, yada, yada, yada. But it looks like that defense is going to be a force to be reckoned with next year.
Meanwhile, with Lake Dallas, that's the thing I like about these is all three of these situations as far as replacing quarterbacks. There's such a different narrative to all three of them. And with Lake Dallas right now, I feel like they're probably the least certain right now. Just among these three as far as what their plan is. Listen, there's two options in play. And a lot of this revolves around what are they going to do with Brandon Engel, who is, I think it's fair to say that he is their most explosive playmaker, no matter what position he is deployed at. But so for the last 2 years, we've all known Brandon Engel as the top receiver on that team. He was, I believe, he made our all-area team. He was one of the best, receivers in the 5A Metroplex last year. Gave him 62 receptions, almost 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns. He was just a monster out wide. He was also one of their backup quarterbacks, and he has been for the last couple of years. So that's kind of now the question heading into the offseason. In the wake of Ryan Depperschmidt graduating, what are they going to do? Are you going to put Brandon Engel back there? He's in a competition with Kyle Nielsen and Trevor Moon, who are more, quarterback, specific as far as where they could be deployed. But it's basically, that's the question for Lake Dallas. Which situation makes their offense operate best? Do you have Engel at quarterback and a bunch of question marks out wide because they are really low on experience, outside of, their starting running back, IK, Onyekwere, and a couple offensive linemen, everyone else graduated. That's been Lake Dallas has not had to incur many off seasons like this where they have had this many seniors graduating. So are you better, putting Engel as your quarterback and then just trying to find some names to step up at receiver, or do you keep Engel at his primary position out at wide receiver where you know what you get? You get one of the top receivers in the Metroplex, and then go with either Nielsen or Moon, who are largely unproven at the position. Nielsen attempted 10 passes last year as a backup, and roll with that at quarterback. It really is the $1 million question for Lake Dallas, and probably no pressure or anything, but the one that will define their season.
Oh, absolutely, because you want to look. It's the age-old question of I have this guy that I want with the football. How do I get this man the football? And if it's I think I would probably lean toward leaving him out wide if you can get either one of those other guys to develop to the point where you can be decent at getting him the football, because he's just so dynamic and so dangerous out wide and does so much to impact an entire defensive look, because you have to account for him. But if you don't feel comfortable with either of those two guys, come August, to the point where you feel like they can even be serviceable, then who's the guy that handles the ball on every play? Then you put him there and say, okay, you're handling the ball every play, go make magic and do Brandon Engel things, and we're going to lean completely on you.
Yeah, if the goal is just to simply maximize the number of reps that Brandon Engel will get, obviously, no matter if it's a pass or the run, the ball always starts in the quarterback's hands. So you could go that route. But yeah, that's because, when I say that they're inexperienced at wideout, if you take Engel away from that receiving core, I added up the numbers, that means Lake Dallas will be without 95.5% of their receptions from last year and 95.6% of their receiving yardage from last year. And guess what? Most of that remaining 5% belongs to running backs. So yeah, like I said, they are going to be so low on experience at receiver. So yeah, it's a fascinating riddle. But if you look at just years past, because that's the thing about the case you made, Taylor. Lake Dallas has a really, really strong history of quarterback play. For being such a small school, you really wouldn't think of that, as much. But you look at their lineage, especially under Coach Young, and I think it was, Tim Glaze, our old Lake City Sun sports reporter. He, I believe, in one time he called Coach Young a quarterback whisperer of sorts. And you look at just their lineage. You go all the way back to just within the past 10 years, guys like James Franklin, who went on to play in the CFL after a really exemplary career at Missouri. Dalen Williams was one of the most accomplished quarterbacks ever at Dartmouth. Dagan Hayne, who led them to the state semifinals his senior year, and then we're just coming off the run of Ryan Depperschmidt, who was just raking in all district accolades and superlatives. So they have really, really good quarterback play historically. So is that where you just say you trust that even if you go with Nielsen or Moon, who don't have experience at the position, that they'll be able to be coached up enough to where they can just fit in seamlessly to that to that offense the way that so many of their predecessors have. It's fascinating, but So Lake Dallas, Reedy, Lovejoy, all with different questions lingering at the quarterback position. Elsewhere in Frisco ISD, a bit of a was Frisco the only team to change its head coach during the offseason?
They were,
at least among the ones that we cover. The Vance Gibson era comes to an end, and the Wing T doesn't though. Wing T's not going anywhere.
No, that's going to be the same old Frisco team. Jeff Harbert takes over. He's been at Frisco for 14 years. He was the defensive coordinator for the last 9.
Okay.
He's the next in line. From Vance Gibson's coaching lineage, and they return all their skill kids, is what he told me when he took the job a few months ago. They're gonna have to replace some guys on that offensive line, but when you think of Frisco football, especially in that offense, I
couldn't picture it any other way.
No, they threw the ball a good amount of times, about a handful of times. I think it was against Sulphur Springs, one of the playoff games, either them against South Oak Cliff. I was at both games, and I was shocked. And I knew it was working for a little bit, but when you see them throw the ball more than 4 times in a game, it's, pigs are about to start flying across the stadium. They just do so many different things, putting guys in motion. You don't know who they're going to hand the ball off to. Expect much of the same of that. And it was just such a good bounce back year for Frisco. Cinderella story, finishing 7-5, making the playoffs, winning a playoff game also. And then, they ran into a really, really, really good South Oak Cliff team. Not many teams were going to beat them. I expect much of the same. They're not much of a new identity. But there's a couple other Frisco schools that I think will have a very different look next season. First, one of them being Memorial. I talked to Coach Derek Roberson earlier this week. He is already telling me they look very different from when they looked the fall last summer. There's a lot bigger. One of their strengths of this team is a bunch of tall receivers. They have some receivers that are upwards of 6'3". Led by Jacoby Bullock, who has an offer from Kansas. They didn't have guys like that going into last season. There's a QB battle also between Charlie Flowers, who played QB most of the year last year. Lanky, long, 6'2" guy, led them to that win against Lebanon Trail, their only win of the year last year. Really the only game that they were in all of last year. And then they also have Gavin Gates, 6'2". He referred to him as the Belldozer back from OU guy.
Blake Bell.
So he compared him to Blake Bell, so they might use him in goal line packages if he's not that full-time starter. And also freshman QB, or he was a freshman last year for the freshman team, Ethan Lawler, he stood out. So 3-way battle for the QB position there. But he just said they're going to be more physical and our bodies look different. So, and it's a lot of the same with Lebanon Trail. But they don't know who their quarterback's going to be either, because Lucas Rexon, who started much of the year last year, he's been battling with blood clots, and he's been out. He's been out indefinitely.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, so their main concern with him is just making sure he's okay, make sure he's healthy. So right now the QB battle for them is between Drew Morton and Alec Zaria, 2 guys that I've actually played, at that position last year when they were kind of carouseling a bunch of guys around. And it'll be a running back by committee. Princeton Parker, Isaiah Jackson, Zarian Kelly will kind of run that workload there. But a player to watch for Lebanon Trail. He finished 3rd, I believe it was in the 400 meter. I don't remember which event it was, but he's one of the fastest guys in the district, according to Coach Saw Jackson. Drew Dudley, player to watch, 6'2", going to be a junior. So Lebanon Trail, Memorial, they're going to look. I'm not saying they're going to win X amount of games or win the district, or I'm not saying that, but they're going to be in some games next year. They're not going to be getting blown out by 40, 50 points, week in and week out.
I mean, it wouldn't be without precedent, because that's the thing about Frisco ISD is when these young athletic programs get good, it's like that. Like you think of
Independence with Dom Williams.
Exactly. It's just what I was thinking. Independence with Dom Williams, what Reedy did this past year, what Lone Star did, 3-4 years ago. I mean,
making it to state.
It just comes out of nowhere. So even though Memorial and Lebanon Trail are both in the infant stages of their programs, history suggests that if one of them does break out, it's going to come quickly.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to see just how different this district looks, because I think the narrative is going to be very, very different than it was at this time last year in this district.
I won't be surprised if you see Memorial or Lebanon Trail in the playoffs next season. Not this upcoming season, but a pretty high playoff spot next year.
Should be fun. And that is a look at least right now where things stand in District 7-5A Division 2. Let's do a quick line change, bring on Devin Hassan to talk some 10-6A, a little Rowlett and Sachse, and we will pick that up in just a moment. Today's podcast is brought to you by Star Local Media. 14 newspapers and websites with a print distribution of 270,000 homes and monthly page views of 600,000 online. Star Local Media, your community voice for news. And now, let's get back to the podcast. And we are back to continue wrapping up some spring football. We've got Devin Hassan here as we talk our first 6A district. We're going to talk 10-5A. Devin Hassan, the Garland ISD aficionado that he is, here to chime in on Rowlett and Sachse, the two primary teams out in that neck of the woods for him, in a district that has largely been dominated by those two for some time now, particularly Sachse.
Yeah.
And coaches always offer up the disclaimer during the spring that none of what you see is final. There's still plenty of positional battles that could change and whatnot before now in August, and no team probably embodied that last year quite like Sachse. Which, whatever they were in the spring, it sure as heck was not what they were, when the playoffs began last season. So, after what was a really bizarre season for Sachse, it still wound up ultimately culminating in another 8-win season, undefeated in district. So a lot of the usual benchmarks. But what's the read on where the Mustangs are at right now, heading into the offseason?
It was, I think. It was certainly unconventional because they didn't change their identity just once. They changed their identity 3 or 4 different times.
They were a chameleon
during the first month, and it was partly due to inexperience at the quarterback position.
Yeah.
It was partly due to injury, but they were just trying to mix and match and find things that worked. But the thing was, they used 4 different quarterbacks within the first 4 games, but all of them had very different styles until they finally settled on Derek Rose, that was actually a converted wide receiver. Who I thought stepped in and did a great job. One of the big reasons they moved him back there was because with a young offensive line, those quarterbacks weren't getting much time to throw. Well, Derek Rose could sit back there and show that he's a heck of a passer, but he was probably their best athlete or top 3 athlete on that team last year. So when the pocket did break down, he could escape and make plays on his own, which is what they've had in the mold of Jalen Maiden and Kent Myers and that for several years. So he kind of fit what they've been doing in terms of having a true dual threat. They're kind of going into this fall or just completing this spring, kind of facing the same questions in terms of what's their identity going to be on offense. This is a team that's won 3 straight undefeated district championships, 19 games in a row overall, but they lost 41 lettermen, and a lot of those were college-bound kids that'll be playing and several D1 at that. So they have 8 starters back in the fold. I mentioned the quarterback battle. Xavier Foreman, the senior, was one of those guys that got an early look. Junior Parker Wells, I think, is a guy to keep an eye on as well. That's a guy that the coaches think has potentially Division I talent, but certainly talent, the tools to move on and play at the college level. Okay. But both of those guys, again, they kind of dip their toe in the waters. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when either one or both is thrown to the fire, because again, Sachse did rotate last year. To compound things, Sachse's had a deep receiving core in recent years, and that's not the case this year. Cameron Quinn got a little bit of experience, but you look at guys like Jaden Hunter and Tristan Turner. These guys are JV guys that are getting their first taste of varsity action. So that passing game is going to be a work in progress. Fortunately for Sachse, they do return Miles Nash at running back. He's a D1 prospect, rushed for 745 yards and 11 touchdowns. Can also catch the ball out of the backfield. And probably the strength of that team right now on offense is the offensive line. I mentioned that last year they were so young. Well, those guys now have a few skins on the wall, and Javon Ellison, Braylon Williams, and Ricardo Ochoa were full-time starters as sophomores. And so they're coming in with a year of experience under their belt. Jacob Morrow got the call up late last season, made a couple starts. So I think that running game for Sachse is where they're going to lean early on as they, like we talked about, try to establish that identity at the quarterback position.
It is odd how, like, that last year, all that quarterback carousel, it kind of turns into almost a bit of a blessing in disguise. guys, because at least you're not throwing someone out there who has just no clue what to expect.
Yeah.
You're competing at the varsity level. I mean, Foreman attempted 45 passes last year. I mean, that's meaningful varsity experience.
He did, but a lot of it, like I say, was early on and late in the season. From where Derrick Rose didn't come in till late, and then he got hurt and missed a couple games late in the season as well. And so, a lot of that was it was with changing game plan. And so, with a full year of offseason, kind of understanding that, hey, these are likely to be our two guys, our two candidates. I'm interested to see, the way they've kind of developed or changed the game plan to fit both these guys' skill sets and how that translates into whoever wins the starting role in the fall.
But Sachse does traditionally traditionally reload fairly well in the face of losing a lot of key players. At least in recent years they have. I'm curious if that same logic applies to Rowlett, because it feels like that theory is going to be tested when you look at another program that graduated a lot of talented seniors. I was just combing back through the 10-6A all-district list, and of the 17 kids that Rowlett had named between the first and second teams, 14 of them are gone.
Yeah.
So, including, quarterback Chase DePaul, running back Chauncey Amos, wide receiver Jerry Evans. So another program that is going to have a very different look.
Yeah, and that's a backfield that produced more than 3,000 yards last year.
Wow.
Between DePaul and Amos, and you mentioned Jerry Evans. They have 8 returning starters overall. They lost a ton of all-district guys on the defensive side of the ball as well. Alex Rout was a kid at quarterback that I had a chance to see come in kind of for some mop-up duty at the end last year. They didn't ask him to throw the ball much, but he was impressive with his legs, with the ability to turn a broken play and make a play out of it. So he's kind of the guy they're looking at right now. Again, it's kind of hard to gauge his passing skills because he simply wasn't asked to do it last year.
Yeah.
CJ Hunt was a guy that got some action in the backfield. He could be ready to step into that one of those roles, although Rowlett has traditionally kind of used a committee approach. Even if they do have a feature back, they still have their guys that help to tote their rock back there. Antonio Hull returning wide receiver is big for them, but it gives them a deep threat. He's a guy that averages near 20 yards per reception, so they'll be looking for different ways to get the ball in his hands. There's a couple guys, Jawanye Newton and Colton Yarborough, who could both contribute at running back and wide receiver. But the offensive line is young. They basically have one returning starter coming back. And on defense, I think they'll be okay up front with guys like Jeremiah Franks and Chris Lockett. But that back seven is going to feature a lot of new faces, guys that are getting. They took a good look at during the spring, but those final decisions are not going to be made probably till the week of the start of the season in August. But again, this is a Rowlett program that's made the playoffs 14 years in a row. Okay. When you have a streak like that proves. Now, some of those teams have been 9-1 type teams, some of them have been 6-4 type teams. But the fact that they've been able to find a way to make the playoffs year in, year out shows that they do have talent in the younger ranks, and they have been able to reload enough to keep that streak alive.
Okay. So with Rowlett and Sachse, and and obviously a nice little different Rubik's Cube for either program, heading into the summer. If you look at the rest of 10-6A, and we don't have to go too deep into this. Don't want you to just say stuff now that you'll just regurgitate later on in August when we do our actual district preview. But if there was one team, whether it's Wiley, whether it's one of those other Garland ISD programs that has had a bit of an encouraging offseason, might be primed to make a leap next year, who's kind of on your radar in that respect?
Well, in terms of contending for a district title, I would say Lakeview.
Okay.
This is a Lakeview team that made the playoffs in 2016 and 2017, missed last year a lot because they lost their starting quarterback the first week of the season. But they've been close. If you look, they lost to 49-38 to Sachse last year in a game where Sachse had to rally. You go back and look at the last couple of years against Rowlett, they lost 46-42. They lost in that 63-62 overtime game. So they've been close to knocking off the two kind of bell cows of that Garland ISD district. And you look at what they return, you just look at the all-district list. Kamar Wheaton, offensive sophomore of the year, I thought one of the most electric players I saw all last year, and I could say that going back to his freshman campaign. Averaged 7 yards a carry, rushed for 1,100 yards. And then you look at the defensive side, Ikechukwu Iwana, hope I got that even close. It's the defensive sophomore of the year. But so they have those two guys back in the fold who are already established standouts. A guy like Ed White at tight end, the defensive side of the ball, Victor Smith, Garnett Burke, and Ja'Cory Tarver in the back. So when you just look at it on paper in terms of returning contributors who are proving themselves at the varsity level, I think Lakeview probably has the most, ready-made to step in there in August and get going.
Okay, there you go. And that's a look at right now kind of where things stand for a few programs in District 10-6A. And that'll wrap up this edition of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. Devin, thanks for swinging by, buddy. Ditto to Taylor Ragland and Brian Murphy. We'll have 2 more districts for you at the start of next week as we continue to check in on where our high school football teams stand heading into summertime. Folks, enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.